So safaris in the time of COVID-19, all of the people on screen love Africa. That much we do know. I'd like to introduce you now to those very people. Underneath me directly is Kim Nixon, who is the Managing Director of Wilderness Safaris in Botswana. And in no particular pecking order here, we've got Andy Hogg, who is the co-founder of the Bush Camp Company in Zambia. Next to me up here in our Brady Bunch style Zoom meeting is Alex Walker from Alex Walker's Serian. And the other bloke with the Australian accent you'll be hearing is my old mate, Brad Horn from Epic Private Journeys. We used to live together in Mount, not the two of us, that is, our families, about 20 years ago. Thank you, everybody, for coming on and giving us the time today. We won't be talking rugby until the very end, all right? Kim, we're going to start with you, mate. You are in Maun as we speak, where Brad and I and our families used to live. You've got the flood coming down from the Angolan highlands a couple of months ago where it started. People locally are very excited about the water's arrival, but not so much about the state of play. Can you tell us what's happening in Maun and the general state of play with wilderness safaris at the moment?
Well, we haven't had a single client in our camp really from the date the lockdown started, which was more or less at the beginning of April. And as it looks now in terms of a forward outlook, there's not going to be any international clients all the way up until the end of September, as we are still in the state of emergency, a declared state of emergency in Botswana, which bans the arrival of any foreigner who's not a resident. As a result, there is the slight opening of the potential for domestic tourism, although that is most certainly going to be very, very small to nothing. And as it stands currently, all of our camps are still temporarily shuttered, with all the staff barring 70, and we have more than 900 staff at home.
So, look, the four of us, Kim, Alex, Brad, and I, are very jealous of the man below because he is the one guy who can step out into the bush right now at Mfui Lodge in Zambia in the beautiful South Luangwa National Park. Andy, give us a brief sort of overview of how things are your end, mate.
Thanks, Simon. I am in Mfui. I live here. I was incredibly fortunate yesterday to see two dogs crossing the lagoon, a wild dog crossing the lagoon in front of my house. So in many difficult situations that we all in, there are some amazing times that we can still have. But as Kim says, it's, we're pretty much the same as then. Botswana, Zambia is still pretty much locked down. There's still a quarantine if anybody enters the country. I think the only flight, and I'm not 100% sure if it's a passenger flight, but I think they're doing cargo, is Ethiopian. So the only flight coming in, I think, is Ethiopian. There's no internal flight flying. I think the government is trying to push some local tourists, but again, that's not going to be significant. So, it's an incredible time. It's our prime time of the year. It's beautiful. The weather's fantastic. The wildlife is amazing. But we're not going to be able to enjoy it this year. And it's going to be tough. It is tough. It's tough all over. It's tough in the communities. It's tough from a conservation point of view. So yeah, it's not an easy time.
Yes, I can well imagine the stress and trauma is not just you guys on screen right now, but it's felt in villages and amongst local people who are on the edge of these concessions and these national parks as well. Alex, I know it's not one size fits all with every African country. What is the situation in Tanzania and in Kenya? You're in Nairobi at the moment.
Yeah, Simon. So in Tanzania, we're open for business in terms of the country's open. They've dropped the quarantine. The government's actively seeking business. It wants the tourism to return. It's a major part of the income. It's 35% of the national income. So it plays a massive part in what goes on. In Kenya, we're still under lockdown until June 6th. And we're playing it. We're seeing, I mean, the guys have done a good job here. I think it's sort of important to note that, all of these countries are actually, in terms of numbers, we're faring pretty well, but the governments have taken different approaches into how they look after it. Kenya is very much distinctly a lockdown type of environment. The planes are due in. I mean, in Tanzania, they're already sort of looking at Qatar and Ethiopian and other airlines, KLM, due to come in within the next couple of weeks, beginning of June. But of course, it all depends on the rest of the world, where we're at in terms of can you go home.
I was going to say, so potentially in Tanzania, I could book a safari in 4 months' time, or for 4 months' time through Brad, but then the Australian government might not be so excited about the prospect of me returning home.
I think, that's what you have to deal with. But the advantage, of course, is this has shown that people can work from home. And if you had to go home and put in 14 days of isolation or quarantine, self-quarantine, then you can do it. So there is that sort of positive element to it. Of course, the first guys to get on a plane and come this way, they're the brave ones. So they're the trendsetters. Europe, of course, Germany and the like, slowly opening. Holland, let's see. I mean, the thing is, this could change as quickly as it came on top of us as well.
Kim, to you, Mount is basically entirely there to support the safari industry. So nearly everyone in the town is involved in some way, either directly or indirectly. Can you give us an indication, and you're speaking for Botswana, of course, only here, and not for everybody else under the wonderful wilderness empire, but for the people that you're dealing with on the ground, and that is people who are maybe making crafts, people who are supplying food and fresh and drinks into the camps and stuff. Can you give us an indication of their sort of emotional state?
I don't think that the mood in Maun is very, very buoyant at the moment. Certainly not happy. It's a very somber place. And essentially, all businesses have had the vast majority of their business fade away. Added to that, there are also bans on the sale of alcohol and also cigarettes, and that's also having an impact on the local economy. But beyond the businesses, there are a lot of local village people that create crafts or sell firewood on the side of the road, or offer services to the self-drive passing traffic of tourists in and out of Maun. And with the lockdown, all of that came to a crashing halt. And then beyond that, there's no outlook beyond until at least the 1st of October. So income, let's say, has really been tremendously affected. Companies in Botswana are allowed to, are permitted by government to send people home on unpaid leave, and many companies have done that. And so the amount of money that's going into the pocket of the average person has at minimum been halved, and in many cases is a lot worse than that for those who are employed.
Andy, to you, mate, many of the people who come on safari with the Bush Camp Company and go into Luangwa and see and enjoy your operation, then also become involved with some of the great charities and some of the projects that you've set up over many years in Zambia. Can you give us a bit of an insight into that side of things? Because I imagine those funds as well have come under some pressure.
To a certain degree, they have dried up. We have been fortunate. We have some people that are helping. We've got a few different ways in which we try and raise money for our projects. The one is the Luangwa Conservation and Community Fund, which is part of the rate, so that's driven by bed nights and bums in beds. And then we've got another concept, which is small change for big change. And that's done really well for us. Lots of people donating small amounts and some bigger amount. We're trying, without having the bums in the beds, and that would give us the big numbers, that the community fund, the Luangwa Conservation Community Fund, works it's a $15 to $20 amount that gets taken out of the rate and put into our community projects. So, with decent bed nights, decent revenue goes into the community. We're fortunate enough to be able to feed 2,500 kids a day, school kids. We this year will get to 120 boreholes, or clean water boreholes that we've put in. So there's lots of things like that, and we're still continuing. We're not able to continue at the same rate as we have been. Our schools are going back in early June. Our feeding program will start again then. We continued it for a little bit once it stopped, and then the government wasn't keen for gatherings, so we had to stop that. But that'll start again as soon as the schools open up. So we've been fortunate in getting some help. It's not as much as we need. At the end of the day, I think the bottom line is bums in beds, and with bums in beds, that obviously feeds the companies, but that also feeds the community. When I say feed, I don't mean with food, but that drives the community, that drives help into the community, and then it helps drive obviously the businesses as well.
Brad, let's bring you in, mate. You've got a lot of repeat business at Epic over many years of going in and out of these wonderful countries and these wonderful camps and lodges and the mobile safaris as well that Alex does. People become super engaged, don't they, over time? Those repeat clients especially, with a lot of the projects that Andy, Kim and Alex will be talking about here. So what message would you like to get out to them, those people who would like to be going on safari in the next couple of months but can't?
Well, look, Simon, yeah, thank you. We've been blessed with some fantastic support over the years, and we've had clients that have done multiple trips and become very engaged with the continent. When I say the continent, I mean sort of sub-Saharan Africa, so from sort of Alex down to Kim in Botswana, and it's a very special continent, as we know. It's a second home to you and I, although we don't live there anymore like these lucky guys do. It's a very special part of the world. You would not meet nicer people in all your life than what you meet when you go on safari in Africa. And so it really gets to the core of people. It goes to their heart. That obviously is evidenced in the fact that there's a high return of all the destinations we offer. Africa is the one that people keep coming back to. So, the message I'd like to get to people, and many of our clients have been to, one of Alex's camps or a couple of Alex's camps, or Kim's, the wilderness operations in Botswana, or with Andy up in Zambia. And, we're obviously supporting other people, other operators or suppliers as well that we work closely with. Their product fits with, creating a wider itinerary. The great concern for me is the fact that, as we know in Africa, unlike in the world we live in, Simon, where the government will step in and start helping out with welfare and that sort of stuff. I'm not saying it doesn't happen in Africa, but it certainly doesn't happen to the extent that it does in the first world. So inevitably, what is happening is, from talking to Kim, Alex and Andy and others, is that people are going hungry because one income feeds a family of 10, or it's reliant on by extended family. So, that's the one aspect, is the community aspect. The other aspect is the conservation aspect, and the fact that these areas don't have a presence anymore because there are no tourists. There's skeleton staff. Anti-poaching is an expensive undertaking. The concern is that there will be increased poaching, which is obviously what we don't need. And so what I'm hoping to get out of this is for our very supportive clients, as they've always been, to put their hand in their pocket, as little as it might be, to see if they can help out in these worthy causes. So it's really a plea for help, to a continent that they're engaged with, and I'd implore them to support if they possibly can. So that's basically the motivation, is to try and get that support to these guys.
Alex, can you speak to that as well, mate? I know even in good times, places like the Ngorongoro Conservation area and the Serengeti system as well. They're under pressure from people running their cattle, herding cattle in some of these areas, and they are constantly under pressure, let alone at a time when there are no tourist dollars coming in. Can you just elaborate on that aspect of things from Tanzania's side?
Yeah, Simon, yeah, I mean, I did make a couple of notes here. You know, the extended family, I think that Brad was talking about, is a massive thing. And once you take that primary provider out of the mix, it means that the communities that surround these areas, and we have large communities all around. I mean, we're talking about an area that's 25,000 square kilometers of extended protected area between the National Park of Serengeti and Ngorongoro. And all around these areas, you've got large populations of people who have traditionally survived in days gone by of going into the parks and or pre the parks and hunting for protein. In the south, in the Ngorongoro area, you've got the Maasai and the Datoga who rely on the grazing lands out there. And of course, with the pastoralists, they're always going to come into contact with the wild dog, with the lions, with the cheetah. And if they no longer see the value in tourism and the tourists coming there and the value of their brothers and their cousins and their mums and dads, everybody being employed or benefiting from tourism, then those predators then become a pest. And inevitably, if you do come into some sort of human-wildlife interaction where there is a threat to your livelihood, which is now your cattle and your goats, you're going to kill off that asset. And it's a national asset, it's a personal asset, it's a community asset. And that message has been getting across very strongly recently. But of course, now we face a breakdown in that message. In the areas that we work in national parks, we work in reserves, and we work in community areas. And each place has its different role, it has a different way that it manages it, and you have different pressures. In the national park up in the Serengeti, you've got very hard boundaries that you'll see. If you go to Google Earth, you'll see the edge of the park very clearly. You'll see the farmland on one side, you'll see the protected area on the other side. But that's now a reservoir for the guys who are going through their harvest today. Once they finish their harvest, they're going to get into those wildlife areas because that's where they go and harvest their the meat from. That means snares, and snares are indiscriminate. Not only does it collect that wildebeest, which is what they're primarily after, but a giraffe, an elephant trunk, a lion, a hyena, you know, they can all fall foul of these things. We started something up there recently with the Frankfurt Zoological Society have been working there for a long while, supporting the national park. And the tourist partners from the Tour Operators Association got together with them. They had a successful little team of ex-rangers managed by Frankfurt themselves in partnership with TUNAPA, the national parks. They guess where they don't guess, they know where the migration is going to be heading. And they get into those areas and they work on both sides. They work in the community by providing micro finance and funding and little sort of business type staples and ideas to try and keep people out of the park. And then inside the park, they have the sort of the stick. They've got the patrol teams going around, collecting the snares and catching the poachers and identifying all these sort of pressure areas. Our issue is that with a majority of the camp staff being drawn from local areas, or certainly the seasonal staff for most of these camps, and for us that's 80% of 120 people are basically employed locally within the region that we work. So they're either Maasai with their cattle, or they're now the courier guys that live and work on the edge of the park. If we don't keep them employed and active, they're then going to go back and try and find some other sort of income. And that generally means going into the park and looking for game meat. So the pressure's on. These are the things that we face.
Kim, continuing that theme, when Brad's and my families were living in Botswana, there were no rhino. They'd been poached out, but Wilderness has been heavily involved in getting rhino back into Botswana. They've successfully re-established, but the very things that Alex has just touched on are very much an issue for you, I'm sure, and all the operators in Botswana now, as there are no tourists around.
Yes, back to Brad's point earlier on, I agree that the commercial, and Andy's point, that the commercial vertical of the company, of any of the businesses, drives every other initiative, whether it is the conservation or the community initiatives. And in Botswana, if I can just draw a distinction, there's two very specific types of poaching. There's the subsistence type of poaching, which is the game meat that Alex was referring to, and then there's obviously the commercial poaching. And certainly last year, there was a concerted increase, shocking increase in the amount of commercial poaching, specifically focused on the rhino. And public figures put it at more than 40 rhino in the space of the last 6 or 7 months. So that's quite a large number. That being said, the government does place significant resources to try and assist with the anti-poaching, and then companies like Wilderness Safaris work very, very closely with the government in monitoring rhinos, as well as providing information and tracking, working hand in hand with government to try and combat the scourge. And it involves a whole lot of different parts, whether it is support with eyes in the sky and presence on areas where we're not in, because some of the conservation areas that we're entrusted with are massive and have no roads through them, all the way through to patrol teams and then joint operations as and where required. But it does cost an extraordinary amount of money, and Wilderness have not stepped away from that responsibility, even though we have no tourists in the country. So these operations are continuing. They do take a heavy toll on what cash reserves are in the business.
Yes, it's the uncertainty, isn't it? I think for all of us, as Alex has said, look, Tanzania is doing it a little bit differently, but even in Australia, we face uncertainty. But as Brad mentioned, we have that safety net, which is relatively strong, and we're very blessed to have that. Andy, relationships with local people, relationships with great organisations like Conservation South Luangwa and like the Zambia Carnivore Program are very important to you. How do you maintain those throughout this time?
Yeah, Simon, the relationships quickly, I think it's always been vital for us, for I think most of us, everybody on this call, relationships are a vital way we do business. And it's often a handshake as opposed to a contract, which for me certainly is the way to do it. And what over the last couple of weeks we've had, we're fortunate that we're helping all of our staff at the moment, and we're able to do that. But we've had staff, or I've had staff come asking if they can get involved in anti-poaching or snaring patrols. They couldn't get involved in anti-poaching, but they certainly could get involved in snaring patrols. And that's come from them asking us if they can get involved in doing things like that. That's meant a lot. I think for me, that's meant that they understand the impact of what might happen. With obviously with people earning less money or no money, and there's wildlife around or meat around, at some stage that meat's going to take a hammering. The thought process of the staff thinking about that without being told was important for me. I mean, it was good. I felt good about it. When they came. Most of our issues at the moment, and not to say it won't escalate, is meat, and I think it's everywhere. Chapata, which is the closest big town, is only an hour and a half away, hour and a half to 2 hours away. There's obviously the Mfuri village, which is getting bigger. So with those numbers increasing, and as I said just now, less money around, less jobs around, the meat trade at the moment is becoming our biggest issue. But that's not to say that the bigger, the elephant and that isn't going to follow in becoming a bigger issue, down the road.
Brad, we definitely want to keep people engaged with Africa and following developments. I mean, you and I have had some interesting discussions about the media coverage of COVID-19 here in Australia and in the US and other places where I guess naturally countries are concerned about their own situation and their own people first. But it is time now for us to cast the net wider and to look at Africa in particular. I know we have a certain bias here, but we do need to engage. We need to engage people as best we can and become conduits for this message, don't we?
Yeah, indeed, Simon. It behoves us to do so because, we rely on these places for our income as well. We don't see people hungry in our countries. In our country, we don't see people hungry, but in Africa, you see people hungry. In Nepal, you see people hungry. You look at Nepal, which is, a bit of an outlier to the African businesses we're trying to support through this. But, you've got, employees of trekking companies, climbing companies that their year is shot. They will not get any income. They rely on a couple of months of the year for their income. And with no tourists, they will get nothing. So people will go hungry. Sure, they'll go back to their farms and they'll grow some potatoes and what have you. And the same in Botswana, they'll go back, for instance, to the cattle post. But it's winter time. Nothing is going to grow really in the winter. So it's a very hard time. It's all well and good for us in the first world to sort of, cocoon ourselves away. But we've got a responsibility. I certainly got a responsibility. And I'd like to think our very good clients feel a responsibility to try and help where they can. And it doesn't take a great deal to, if a lot of people put in a little bit, it'll make a hell of a difference. So we may not have covered it in the nitty-gritty detail that wouldn't really like to without sort of making people sit through, a couple of hours of this. But at the end of the day, the conservation of these areas is absolutely paramount. It's a resource. It's not, an inexhaustible resource, and we need to protect it. And not only that, people obviously have to be protected. People have to be fed. Hungry people, it just doesn't make sense. In today's world where we've got the resources, particularly in the first world and the big economies, the first world economies, we've all got the wherewithal to make a difference. I don't like to do it. It's not in my nature to ask for help. In a case like this, we don't know how long this bloody thing's going to go on. So if anyone can help, anyone can put their hand in their pocket and donate $50 or $100. We're not talking thousands of dollars. We're just talking a contribution, and that will go a long way to making a difference. And it can be entrusted to these guys because, I wouldn't have invited them into this initiative if I didn't trust them 100%, because every dollar that's donated is going to go to the source and is going to go to making a difference. That's where we're at, mate, and it's a desperate situation.
Well, for those of us who love Africa, I think we have a responsibility, indeed an obligation to do this around the houses, because I know everyone's time is valuable. And despite the fact that there are no tourists at the moment, there's a lot going on as you try and wrestle with these issues. Alex, to you first, mate, what would you like to say to anyone watching this?
I think the main thing is that what we've seen is that conservation is heavily dependent on tourism, on people coming to see us, coming to stay. I think at the future stage, we want people to come and spend longer to really understand the message, to come and involve yourself in a deeper sort of sense of the meaning. But in the meanwhile, it's really our staff that are hurting. They're the guys that are hurting the most. They are the providers for this extended family. That's Africa's solution to welfare. We need the help. We need to keep these guys occupied. We need to keep them out there in the field. We need to keep a presence, because a presence is what keeps the poaching down and really makes a huge difference on the ground.
Well said. Kim, I guess you echo those thoughts?
Definitely concur. If I could just paint the picture of what is really happening on the ground over here. The second you move out of the small towns and villages, and Maun is essentially a small village, that's where you can find the food. But when it reaches away from Maun and into the small village areas around the World Heritage Site of the Okavango Delta, for example, into towns like Saronga and Etsa and Beta, getting the food there is a challenge to start off with. And during the lockdown, very little to nothing arrived. And so it really is a very desperate point. We basically are looking at food hampers for as many vulnerable people around the World Heritage Site and up around the Chobe Linyanti system as we can possibly afford to do, because it does two things. It keeps hunger away from the door, and $35 is enough to feed a family of 4 for nearly a month. And essentially by doing that, you inadvertently assist conservation, because you are able to slow that subsistence type of poaching. The other aspect for us, which we really need help on, is on the commercial poaching side of things. It is cash heavy, and it involves helicopter flying, and we need to continue doing that so that we can stave off the illegal entrants focusing on rhino and elephant poaching and help the Botswana government. Thank you, Simon.
Yeah, we don't want to empower the bad guys at all and have them feel like they have carte blanche to do what they want in Botswana or anywhere in Africa. Brad and I often lament the fact that people in the developed world, in Australia, in the US, tend to look at Africa's problems through our own lens, and that lens is very skewed because of the privileges that we enjoy in our country in particular. Just in closing, though, what would you like to say to people watching this if they haven't been to Africa before, they've been thinking about a safari, or if they're return clients watching this in Munich or New York or London or Paris right now? What would you like to say?
These guys are salt of the earth, like a lot of people in Africa, and we've got to conserve this environment. We've got to help these people as much as we can during this trying time. As Andy said, once the bums come back into the beds, that'll pretty much, hopefully, well on the way to take care of itself again. But right now, there's a need, and I just ask people to, if they can, put their hand in their pocket and just donate a bit of money, because it will make the world a difference.
I think we're all incredibly lucky to do what we do. We live in an amazing place. We have amazing experiences. We meet amazing people. But there are other challenges, and Africa is a challenge. It's amazing. It's special. But there certainly are challenges that we all face that are certainly not faced in the rest of the world. We love it, and they're challenges, and we need to take them on board, and we embrace them, and we move forward. And I think we all grow from that. But I think, and I said it a little bit earlier, for me, it's about bums in beds that will help drive the business, which then drives the community and the conservation initiatives that we all seriously a part of. We want them to work. We want to make a difference. That's why we do them. This area is the Luangwa Conservation and Community Fund that we set up makes a difference. It educates hundreds of people. It feeds thousands of people every day. So but it is about people going to the wild places, the bums in the beds in all wild places in the world, which will help contribute to making, keeping and conserving all these places. But it's one other point, and I think it's costs now for benefits later. The cost of an anti-poaching patrol now, or a snaring patrol, or as Kim said, a chopper flight or an airplane, those are costs now that will benefit us and everybody that comes to visit any of us later. So I think that's an important point for me to get across.
One last pitch to those good souls out there who might be able to help.
We'd be very, very grateful, as always, for that support. So really appreciate you guys putting your time in for this. It's greatly appreciated, and same to you, Simon, for giving your time and your expertise. Let's see what we can do. Let's hope for the best. Thanks, guys.
Indeed. So to everyone watching wherever you are, thank you so much. And thank you, Alex. Thank you, Kim. Thank you, Andy. Andy's the lucky guy, as we said. He gets to step outside and see an elephant or some dogs chasing an impala coming through Mfui in the next few hours, of which we're very jealous. But thanks, everybody. And let's hope that we can make a difference. As small as it might be, all those dollars count big. Thanks, everyone.
Thank you so much.
One more point, Simon. I'm even envious of Kim and the donkeys in Maun at the moment. So take care, guys.